Syria is experiencing the worst, most brutal violence since the fall of the Assad regime 3 months ago. Clashes between current government security forces and gunmen loyal to the former president threaten to plunge the country even deeper into sectarian violence. This in a country already trying to emerge from 14 years of brutal civil war. Canada, along with other G7 countries, had been trying to help with crafting a pathway to peace in Syria. Joining us now, just off a plane from his travels in the region, is Omar Alghabra. He is Canada's Special Envoy for Syria. Thank you so much for joining us today, Omar.
Great to be with you, Mercedes.
A weekend of tremendous bloodshed and violence in Syria after relative peace, the highest amount of violence, the most significant violence that we've seen since the fall of the Assad regime. How would you describe what's happening in Syria right now?
Let me just say that the reports of violence against civilians on the west coast in Syria is unacceptable. I have friends whose families been impacted by what just happened this weekend, and I am horrified by the risk of sectarian civil war. You know, the fall of the Assad regime was good news, not only for Syrians, but for the entire world. But those of us who've been following Syria, and most analysts will tell you that there is a risk that Syria could fall into a long sectarian divisive war. And that's why it's really important for Canada and the rest of the world to play a role in making sure that Syria finds its right path that respects all of its citizens and contributes to global peace.
Syria had this, wonderful period of relative calm after so much suffering for so many years. What triggered the violence in the last few days to suddenly accelerate so drastically?
Mercedes, the tension has been there since the fall of the regime. Obviously, it was there before, and it took on a different form after the fall of the regime. After the fall of the regime, given who garnered power, given who lost power, the various players in the region, there's a lot of interest at stake, and many of us are afraid that those competing interests and the sectarian tension could spill into conflict. So I would argue that tension had existed for a while. Unfortunately, this weekend we saw tremendous violence that had many civilians pay the price for.
Yeah, the Syrian Syrian human rights organizations reporting potentially hundreds of civilian deaths, young men of military fighting age being executed with or without, they say, evidence that they are fighters or in militias. Very concerning. HTS is the government. HTS is a designated terror group, or was. I think a lot of our viewers will recognize them more by their former name, the Al-Nusra Front. They used to be a part of Al-Qaeda. They since split off. To a lot of people's surprise, they seem to be open to forming a government that was diverse and represented the many Syrian factions, that had women, that had people from different religious groups in the country. And Canada is one of the countries that had opened the door to at least talking to them, as many in the G7 had. How confident are you that HTS has reformed their ways? And does what you're seeing this weekend increase your concern about what kind of government they're going to be?
Look, we have to make sure that the Syrian people are finally able to live in peace and dignity. HTS has a troubling past, no doubt about it, and we are not naive about it. We have been working with our allies, with our partners, with our friends in the region, and we know there's consensus. As you just said, I came back from the region. There's consensus. The region and the world cannot afford to let Syria miss this opportunity that is before them. So there is a unique opportunity in this moment of history. But we need to make sure that the Syrian government utilizes this opportunity for the benefit of its citizens, that is inclusive, that is respectful, that is democratic. The Syrian government has been saying a lot of the right things since they took power. And that's why it's really important that we engage, that we offer guidance, that we offer assistance to ensure to guide them to get on the right path, and with conditions, with expectations, and with understanding that we are all for the benefit of the Syrian people and stability for Syria.
HTS used to have a Salafist jihadi ideology. Have you had some direct conversations with them about whether they still hold those beliefs which support political violence?
I met with the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs along with Minister Melanie Joly at the Paris conference 2 weeks ago in Paris, where most of Europe and most of the Middle East were there. We had conversations about their vision for Syria. All I could tell you is I'm hearing a lot of the right things, a lot of the right vision, the commitment to having an inclusive civil society-based Syria. Having said that, we need to hold this government accountable. But the other thing that I'm optimistic about is Syrian civil society. Over the last many weeks, I've met with Syrian civil societies in the region and in Canada, and I'm optimistic about their desire and their ability to act as a watchdog on this government, to hold their government accountable, to ensure that they do the right thing. They still have constitutional studies in front of them. They still have to have democratic framework in front of them. They still have to set up, so many other aspects. They have to elect or select a new government. All that has yet to be done, and we're keeping an eye on it. We're also certainly working with our partners and our allies and civil society to make sure that it's done for the benefit of the Syrian people.
Bashar al-Assad was backed by Iran and Russia, both on their back foot right now in the region, although obviously a lot of concern about perhaps the Russians being reinvigorated by their relationship with President Donald Trump. Iran has suffered from the airstrikes from Israel. One of the things I've heard from experts and people who work in this is that while HTS may not be ideal, they're better than Assad and they push back Russia and Iran. What is the relative strength of Russia and Iran in Syria right now?
This is exactly the reason why the world needs to engage to ensure that darker forces do not take over Syria and inflict damage on the Syrian people and on the region. Look, after the fall of the Assad regime, certainly Iran and Russia has been in retreat, and we need to make sure that any external influence that is negative, that is not for the benefit of the region or the Syrian people, make sure that there is enough immunity within the Syrian government and the Syrian civil society to reject such foreign interference. It's really, again, what we know is that if you create a civil society, a strong civil society, it will be able to resist such temptation or influence and also advocate for its own citizens.
I think in this case, a bit of a combination of the enemy of my enemy is my friend and lessons learned from places like Libya. What happens with power vacuums if you don't have some form of a stable government after a dictator. I want to turn to something a little bit more personal for you. You are Syrian. You have family still in Syria. This is intensely part of your life and who you are, and you've talked about Syrian civil society, and we have so many Syrian refugees who joined us here in Canada when your government first came into power. If you could make the choice right now to help Syria as Canada's envoy, what recommendations would you give for the Canadian government to pursue? What can we do to help?
So first, let me talk about the special bond that Canada has with Syrians. As you said, we've welcomed over 100,000 people. Tens of thousands of Canadian families opened up their doors and their hearts to Syrian families who are escaping violence. Syrians have integrated themselves in Canada. They've built businesses. They've become professionals, doctors, nurses, and they're skilled workers. And there's a special bond that exists between Canada and Syria that is really fueling our desire to do good by Syria. And to answer your question, I really think we need to ensure that Syria does not miss this opportunity. And the best way to do this is give them a chance, however, hold them accountable. So give them a chance by adjusting and easing some of the sanctions, by figuring out how to support civil society, by providing them advice on how to build governance and democracy, and ensure that that they are Syrian people themselves are not left alone. Because I have great confidence in the Syrian people. However, we have question marks about this government, and the best way to do this is by strengthening civil society and supporting their effort in having a democratic, stable Syria.
Omar, I know not only an intellectual and professional project for you, but one close to your heart. Thank you so much for joining us with this update fresh out of that region.
Thank you very much.